You will be my witnesses to the uttermost parts of the earth. Those are words spoken by Jesus on the day that he ascended to heaven. They're recorded for us by Luke in the book of Acts chapter 1 verse 8. Once Jesus said those words, you are to be my witnesses, that became a theme throughout the book of Acts. In fact, that became one of the titles for the early Christians, both in the pages of Scripture and also in the literature outside of Scripture. But what exactly did it mean to be called a witness? They were to be a witness to the resurrection of Jesus. Now, of course, when they're witnessing, they're going to tell the whole story. They're going to tell everything they know about Jesus. But the role of witness focused on one key idea, that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead. Peter set this idea in motion in Acts chapter 2 when he preached that first gospel sermon on the day of Pentecost. He said to the crowd that Jesus, God raised him up again, and we are all witnesses. In his second sermon, Acts chapter 3, he said to the people, you put to death the Prince of Life. That's the one that God raised from the dead, and we are his witnesses. Now, in their role of witnessing to the resurrection of Jesus, they were to tell what they actually knew, what they saw with their own eyes, what they witnessed. And then they take what they saw and they relate it to the Old Testament scriptures that prophesied about the coming Messiah. In other words, they would follow the very pattern that Jesus laid out for them when he led them in a Bible study. Luke chapter 24, starting with verse 45, Jesus took the disciples. He helped them to understand the scriptures. He explained scriptures to them. He said to them, thus it is written, that the Christ would suffer, that he would rise again from the dead on the third day. And he showed them those things in the Old Testament scriptures. And then Jesus said to his disciples, then you will be witnesses of these very things. So they will tell what they saw, and they will relate it to the scriptures to show scriptures fulfilled in the death and resurrection of Jesus. Now, those early witnesses were not witnesses of the resurrection event itself. You see, the moment Jesus came to life, there were no human eyewitnesses. The disciples were off somewhere hiding. The women were walking toward the tomb. But the moment Jesus came to life, no human eyes were there to see. So what will they witness to then? Well, there are two key things they can testify to what they saw: the empty tomb and the resurrection appearances of Jesus. Now, first, the empty tomb. That was set up for them when the angel at the tomb, the one who rolled back the stone, when he called them in and said, come, see the place where he was lying, and then go quickly and tell his disciples. That becomes the pattern. Come, look at the tomb, and then go tell what you saw when you looked at the tomb. So the women, they came in and looked at the tomb. In Luke 24, we're told that these women, they amazed us, the disciples said, because they were at the tomb very early in the morning, and they couldn't find his body. Now, of course, the disciples aren't going to just simply take their word for it, and so they also went to the tomb, and they found it exactly like the women had said. They didn't find Jesus in the tomb. Now, that's the reason why Jesus took 40 days between his resurrection and ascension and stayed here on the earth before he went back home to heaven. Those 40 days were for the purpose of presenting himself alive after his suffering, to give convincing proof that he was alive. He appeared to his disciples over that period of 40 days. Basically, that 40 days of appearances was designed to create the witnesses, eyewitnesses of Jesus alive. We're told in Acts chapter 10, as Peter explained all of this to Cornelius, that God raised Jesus on the third day, and then he granted that he become visible. That's the appearances, that he be seen. And not just to all people, no, but more specifically to the witnesses that God had chosen. Now, the witnesses of the resurrection were quite a number and quite varied. For example, as far as the variety of types of witnesses, you had the apostles, the leaders of the people. But you also had a whole lot of other disciples that weren't at the rank of apostle, but still they were followers of Jesus. The witnesses also included women, and very interesting, It included family members of Jesus. For example, his mother Mary will be one of the witnesses. His brother James will be one of the witnesses. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 7, that Jesus appeared to James, even as he appeared to the other apostles. And it may be that he appeared to his brother Jude. Now, we don't know that for a fact. But James will become a Christian and a leader of the church. His brother Jude will also become a Christian. He'll write the book of Jude. And so it's possible that 3 family members had appearances from Jesus, became witnesses of his resurrection. Now, the witnesses also were large in number. First, there was the 12 apostles. Then there were the several women that were there to witness at the tomb. And then we're told that there were many disciples, as many as 500 at one time. Paul mentions that in 1 Corinthians 15, that Jesus appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time. That's in one sitting. I'm assuming that was probably not in Jerusalem, where such a thing would be dangerous, but maybe back up in Galilee, where it was safer to gather and support the cause of Jesus. But he appeared to more than 500 at one time. And Paul points out that when he wrote the letter to the Corinthians, that a lot of those people are still alive today, still witnessing, though some have fallen asleep, some have passed away. Now, there were many witnesses to the empty tomb, to the appearances, and that's a good thing, because sometimes a skeptic will object to the resurrection story and say, you know what I think? I think they were just hallucinating. They just imagined that they saw Jesus alive. Now, if you only had one witness, maybe 2, you might wonder. But when you have over 500 people, even at one time, and they all claim to have seen Jesus alive, that defies the idea of a hallucination. There's something else going on. The witnesses to Jesus' resurrection were credible witnesses. First, they were first-hand eyewitnesses. That is, they didn't hear it from their cousin so-and-so who heard it from Uncle so-and-so. No, they actually looked inside the tomb. They actually saw one of the resurrection appearances of Jesus. They are first-hand eyewitnesses. That's good. Another reason they're credible witnesses is because they were disciples, followers of Jesus, who knew Jesus well. We're told, for example, in Acts chapter 13, that when God raised Jesus from the dead, that for many days he appeared, notice, to those who came up with him from Galilee to Jerusalem. These were people who knew Jesus back in his hometown area, came with him to Jerusalem. Those people were the ones God chose to be the witnesses. He says that's the very ones who now are the witnesses to the people. They're credible witnesses because they can confirm that the person they saw in the appearances is the same person they had known through the years when they followed him in Galilee. They can make that identification between this and that. They're credible witnesses. And who are those credible witnesses? Well, there's the apostles, of course. They were the close inner circle of Jesus. But also the women from Galilee who served him in his needs, like Mary Magdalene, who's in many of the stories of Jesus, or Salome, the mother of James and John, 2 of his apostles, and family that also lived near Jesus' family back in the hometown. There's also his brother James, who ought to know him pretty well, his brother Jude, and so the witnesses are credible because they knew Jesus personally and could identify that he's the one they saw in the appearances. Also, these credible witnesses were willing to die for their testimony. That makes their testimony even stronger. You know, the word witness in Greek is the word martyria. You probably know what happened to that Greek word martyria. Originally, it just simply meant someone who testifies to what they saw. But as these witnesses testified to what they saw with the tomb and the appearances, as they testified to the resurrection of Jesus, they were then opposed. They were arrested. Many of them were killed. And we still called them the witnesses, but now it was the word the martyrs. Martyria became martyrs. And they were willing to become martyrs for Christ, rather than renounce the story they told in their witness. Now, what was their purpose? Their purpose was apologetics, that is, to provide evidence, to provide reasons for believing the resurrection stories, to make a good case for believing this story. Now, that was required of anyone who wanted to be an apostle. They had 12 until they lost Judas. They replaced him with one more. They replaced him with Matthias. And the criteria? It's got to be somebody who accompanied us all the time that Jesus was among us, from his baptism by John to the day he was taken up to heaven. That person can be with us, a witness to the resurrection. That was also expected of every disciple who witnessed the tomb and the appearances. If you witnessed, you were expected to become a witness to Jerusalem, to Judea, to Samaria, to the uttermost parts of the earth. All the witnesses are so valuable to our Christian faith, important then in evangelism, but important today because they help us confirm our faith. We have good reason to believe in the resurrection of Jesus because of the testimony of many faithful witnesses.